Hi, I'm Joe Pearman, and I'm wondering how we can use the process of writing to make better decisions at work. One of the tough things when we're making a decision is that we want to get some kind of sense of objectivity on the best decision without our personal perspective clouding things. One of the ways this happens is called framing. Framing is defined as circumstances in which people choose differently when presented with different descriptions of the very same problem. From a business perspective, one of the most direct examples of this effect, this framing effect, is from a study reported in 1998. And in the study, a group of insurance professionals was split in two groups randomly, and both groups were given this scenario. The scenario is, you're a marine property adjuster charged with minimizing the loss of cargo on 3 insured barges that sank yesterday off the coast of Alaska. Each barge holds $200,000 worth of cargo, which will be lost if not salvaged within 72 hours. Although the scenario didn't go into detail, we have to assume perhaps the currents would take the cargo away, perhaps the water would get in and spoil it, or something like that. So the scenario goes on to say, the owner of a local marine salvage company gives you 2 options for salvaging this cargo, and both of these options will cost the same. Now here's where these two groups of insurance professionals got different options. So the first group got a plan A, which will definitely save the cargo of one of the 3 barges, which was worth $200,000, as you remember. That was plan A, or they could choose plan B, which has a 1/3 probability of saving the cargo of all 3 barges, so that's $600,000. But of course, 2/3 probability of saving nothing at all. So presumably, although the scenario didn't say, presumably it would normally take 3 days to save the cargo of 1 barge, doing it properly, but maybe there's a riskier way that would speed things up. So from this group, 71% of the respondents in the study chose the plan A, which would save 1 barge for sure. And of course, I don't think there's a right answer here, it's just down to their appetite for risk, really. So the other group in the study was given 2 other options. So a plan C, which would result in the loss of 2 of the 3 cargoes, so worth $400,000, or a plan D, which had a 2/3 probability of the loss of all 3 cargoes and the entire $600,000, but a 1/3 probability of losing no cargo at all. Now, you've probably spotted that C is exactly the same as A, it's just a different way to say it. And D is the same as B, so it's the riskier option. So given that these 2 groups were randomly picked, you'd expect their appetite for risk to be about the same. And it wasn't, because just based on the words, 80% of group 2 preferred plan D, the riskier option. And again, it's not that there's a right answer here, but you would expect these 2 groups being chosen randomly would have the same preference. It's a bit worrying that the choice of words alone determined to a large extent which option was picked. So psychologically, what was probably going on here was what's called loss aversion, where people take the prospect of a loss, especially if it's a definite loss, much worse than an equivalent gain. But here, it's just the wording that makes it seem different. So framing has a large effect, and possibly a negative effect that you may not realize. Framing effects don't only apply to losses. The overall context of a frame, so the bigger picture, has a big effect too. What we really want to do, of course, is cancel out the effects of framing and make the best, most objective decision that we can. So to do this, you might think, well, let's simply change the frame. Let's think in a different way. But it's not as easy as that. I mean, it could be that your peers, others involved in the decision, have a strong emotional attachment to a particular framing as well. And we find that when we challenge people's frames, sometimes they'll actually get quite defensive about it. They have a sense of attachment to it and they resist this. Actually, even in these kinds of studies, when the framing effect is presented to the respondents, they still tend to stick with their original choice. So we need some kind of way to reflect on this, some way to get some more perspective and gently change our minds. Some very interesting studies found that if you process the information about your choice in a foreign language, it actually gives you a sense of space and a greater sense of objectivity. Of course, it's a foreign language that you understand, but nevertheless, it's a language that you didn't grow up speaking and reading. So when you do that, somehow, just the fact of it being in a foreign language helps to give you some perspective on this, and it reduces the framing effect, and you can make a more objective decision. But this doesn't sound terribly practical for everyday work. I mean, how are you going to translate every piece of material that you have to decide on into a foreign language, assuming that you do actually speak and read one? So is there a more practical way, perhaps, that we can get some sense of objectivity and space around our decisions? Now, sometimes the process of writing itself gives us that sense of perspective and space, particularly if we're writing to explain to somebody else. For example, in putting together this information about the framing effect, I now understand it in a deeper way than I did before. But even when we're just writing for ourselves, sometimes it seems that that reflective process can help us. So in the next video, I'm going to look at this. Can writing actually help us reduce the framing effect and other cognitive biases? And if so, what kind of writing might help us the most? Thanks for listening. I'd love to hear of your experiences in the comments, your experience of framing effects and other factors that may shape people's decisions without them knowing. Thank you.